Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to part 2 in the series of finding out what is the best graphics card for the SuperSocket 7 platform. Today we're going to have a look at graphics cards from Nvidia. So why Nvidia? What happened to 3DFX? Like I said in the previous video, I had planned to start with the 3DFX cards. Well, everything went fine. I had all the benchmark results in, and then I switched to Nvidia and the problems began. I had serious issues. I could not get this motherboard to cooperate with any of the Nvidia cards. I would get hard lockups whenever I started a game, and I tried all sorts of things. And big shout out to the guys from Vogons, especially one user who goes under the name Brostanen. He zipped me up his via chipset drivers and all the graphics card drivers, and I tried a few other things, BIOS settings, and I tried various chipset drivers and compatibility settings, but I just could not get this motherboard to cooperate. Now, if you have this open motherboard and you have Nvidia cards and you got it going, I'd like to hear from you. What settings did you use? What drivers worked for you? Not to be defeated, I just switched to a different motherboard. This one is from DFI. It's the K6XV3 Plus 66 revision B2. Another great SuperSocket motherboard. This seems to be one of the most modern ones. It looks very stylish and very modern, and also with the same via chipset. This motherboard worked great with the 3DFX cards, and I also got it going with the Nvidia cards, but it was a real struggle. Basically, Nvidia cards and SuperSocket platforms, you will have, potentially you will have issues. Now, I don't want to say you will be guaranteed to have issues, because every motherboard is a bit different, and just because I had a hard time, it doesn't mean that you have a hard time. But just reading on forums and talking to people, it seems that you have to muck around a little bit and find the right combination between motherboard, Nvidia graphics card, chipset drivers, graphics drivers, and BIOS settings to get everything up and running. But if you do, I think the reward is worth it. Just want to say so much that if the Nvidia cards work, they're actually really beautiful. You get the 32-bit colors and all sorts of other things, which we will talk about. In total, I restarted the benchmarking 4 times. So a lot of time got wasted, and I really was hoping to do a polished video, but it is time to just get something out there. And sometimes it's good if you run into issues and share problems, because not always everything works. And those of you who play around with old computers, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. While benchmarking and testing, I actually realized that using a sound card really affects the results and slows it down. So I decided to benchmark without the sound card. It was an ISA AW64 sound card. So I'm deciding to benchmark without the sound card, and I'm planning on doing a dedicated video where I'm going to look into the cost of using sound cards in terms of performance. Is there a difference between ISA or PCI? What about using a Vortex 2 compared to, for example, a live sound blaster? Is one card going to slow down the system more than the others? Are there any differences? Okay, at this point, I just want to briefly mention all the graphics cards that I'm going to benchmark. First up, we have the Nvidia River TNT, the original TNT, and this one is a model from ELSA. It is the Eraser 2. Next up, we have the Nvidia River TNT2 M64. Now, this is a cut-down version, and if you happen to look on eBay for a TNT2, you will most likely find a ton of these, the M64. Very cheap graphics cards back in the days, popular with the OEM companies. Is it good enough for the SuperSocket 7 platform? It is a basic graphics card, but the SuperSocket 7 platform also has basic processing power. So is it a good match or not? Well, we will find out soon. Next up, we've got another graphics card from ELSA. This is the TNT2 Pro, and I believe this one came originally with some 3D shutter glasses, although I don't have them. I think they plugged into here. And the model number, this is the Eraser 3 Pro with 32 megabytes of memory. So the TNT2 is often recommended for anyone looking to build a Windows 98 gaming machine. It's kind of the go-to card. In terms of competition, it was really right up there against the 3DFX Voodoo 3. So bit of a fight. You're either in the camp of Nvidia or 3DFX. Well, let's find out what this card can do. Is it the ultimate Windows 98 graphics card or not? And we have another graphics card from Elsa. This is the first GeForce, the GeForce 256 DDR. I did a cooling mod, the stock cooler. Yeah, it didn't really work well, so I just put in a larger one, mounting it with a single screw. This one is the Eraser X squared with also 32 megabytes of RAM. So Nvidia called this the first GPU because it was able to do texture and lighting on the video card. That was traditionally something that the CPU did in software. So basically what this means is that games potentially can run a little bit faster if the game supports hardware, texture and lighting. So we will actually look into that. Is that a feature worth getting or not? We'll check out some benchmarks and we'll see what the impact of the texture and lighting GPU is. Next up, we have two GeForce 2 cards. This is one that's really easy to find. It's a GeForce MX and specifically the MX 400. Now there are three GeForce 2 MX cards. There's the original GeForce 2 MX, and then there's the MX 200 and 400. The original GeForce 2 MX and the MX 400 are pretty decent, but do avoid the MX 200. I believe it might have half the memory. It's definitely significantly slower than the others, so look out for the GeForce 2 MX 400 or the regular GeForce MX. And then the other GeForce 2 card I have is this one. This is actually a Quadro, a workstation class card, the Quadro 2 Pro, and I really like the look of this. Just the green colors and the cooler, it looks really lovely. And this is the workstation equivalent to the GeForce 2 Ti, which is hard to track down, but you'll actually find the Quadro cards a lot easier and cheaper. So don't rule out getting a Quadro card. They actually work really well. And another thing that the GeForce 2 cards have, they introduced the DVI port. I believe these are the first ones with the DVI port. Maybe the GeForce 256 had it too. But you'll definitely see it often on the GeForce 2. So those of you who are using LCD monitors, that's something to watch out for. And also in the future, it seems that the VGA port is being phased out in lots of new monitors. So having DVI might become a feature that's quite important down the track. Next up, we've got a GeForce 3. This is a GeForce 3 Ti200 from WinFast. The Ti200 is the slowest GeForce 3 out of the bunch. There's a regular GeForce 3, and then there's a even faster card, a GeForce 3 Ti 500. Highlight of the GeForce 3 cards and newer is they do have stronger performance with anti-aliasing. So if you want to get rid of jaggies, then maybe this is a card for you. And then we've got two GeForce 4 cards. This is the GeForce 4 MX 460. If you're looking for GeForce 4, you will also always find a lot of the MX versions. From doing a bit of research, I believe that the 460 and the 440, they offer quite decent performance, but stay away from the 420 that has quite low memory performance, and also stay away from the SE edition. So if you see something like a 440 SE, there will be also quite a bit slower than the standard 440. But maybe because it's such a new card, the GeForce 4, maybe it's actually really good for the Super Socket 7, or maybe not. We will find out soon. And the final card I'm reviewing is this one here. This is the GeForce 4 Ti 4200, the AGP 8X version. I've replaced the cooler with one of these Salman clone coolers that you can get on eBay for very little money, and they work really well. Basically inaudible and excellent cooling performance. Also looks quite cool in my opinion. Yeah, so we'll check out, is it worth going for such a new card? In my opinion, the GeForce 4 and the GeForce 3, they're both DirectX 8 cards. In my opinion, they're better suited for a Windows XP gaming machine, but we will see whether or not they make sense for Windows 98. Okay guys, here we go. Brace yourself. Death by PowerPoint. Lots of slides are going to be unleashed at you. So quick talk about the hardware. Just like in part 1, everything is the same. However, I did swap the motherboard for the DFI motherboard because I had issues with the Nvidia graphics card. The other thing I changed, I removed the sound card and also changed the hard drive to an 80GB SATA hard drive because I can just pull it out, put in my hard drive USB dock and take an image for cloning, and that makes my life easier. Also important are the graphics drivers. Version 8.05 I was able to use from the first TNT up to the GeForce 2. But starting with the GeForce 3 Ti 200, I had to use a much more recent driver. Now do note that the Ti cards are refresh cards. That means if you have got a plain GeForce 3, you can actually go a little bit further back with the drivers. Same goes for the GeForce 4. I had the Ti with the AGP 8X. That also needs a little bit more modern driver. Now, over the weekend, I spent some time and uploaded all my Nvidia drivers to my website. I created a Nvidia Windows 98 driver archive where you can see all the driver versions on the left side, and on the right hand side a copy paste out of one of the driver files that tells you what graphics cards are supported. DirectX 7, USB storage driver, Windows 98 of course, and yep, that's it. Let's move on to the next slide. What's going on here? We've got tips to get SuperSocket 7 stable. Try to go vanilla, no chipset drivers. This actually worked for me with the DFI motherboard. I couldn't believe it. I was mucking around with all sorts of 4-in-1 via chipset drivers, but in the end, I just did not install a chipset driver at all, and it worked surprisingly very well. I had no issues with most of the cards. If you do install a chipset driver, go with something older like 4.29, and these drivers give an option to install turbo or normal AGP mode. Avoid the turbo mode. Make sure you're trying older Nvidia drivers like version 6.3.1 or even older, depending on what card you have. In the BIOS, if there's an option to disable AGP2, try that. You can also set the AGP aperture size to 4 MB and play around with the wait state BIOS options for the AGP interface. And there's a little software tool, I'll put a picture in the video, that allows you to set a SuperSocket 7 Nvidia registry compatibility flag. That can also help. Benchmarks, we've got 3D Mark 99 Max, 2000, GL Quake and Quake 2, Earth 2150, okay, actually I kicked that out, so that's not included. One of my viewers told me that benchmark is not really representative of the gameplay, and he was absolutely right. It's not. The numbers produced by the benchmark, by the benchmarks are really good, but when you play the game, it runs at 20 frames per second, so useless benchmark. We're using MDK2 to look at the TNL stuff, texture and lighting, and we've got some DOS benchmarks, 3D Bench, PC Player Bench, Doom and Quake. Now you might be going, oh my god, that's not enough benchmarks, you should have done a lot more, and I wanted to. In my first run I had a lot more benchmarks. I had Forsaken in there and Draken and all sorts of things, but firstly, a lot of these benchmarks take forever to run, and I've got lots of cards to go through, and I've still got the 3DFX cards to go to. I have to do ATI and maybe some other cards as well. So it has to be quick, and sorry that I can't do too many benchmarks. It's just, it's not possible. But we should still, oh, I forgot a game. Incoming is also Incoming is also in the list. I forgot a game that's a direct 3D game. Yeah, time is an issue, but the other issue is that a lot of the games that have built-in benchmark functionality, especially the direct 3D games like Drakan, or I can't remember some of the other games, they really don't run well on the SuperSocket 7 platform. You get maybe 40-50 frames, but not more, and that's not really that optimal. So at least the Quake games, they run fairly well, and so does Incoming. And we can still draw enough conclusions from all of this. Yeah, it is what it is. Okay, here we are, 3D Mark 99 Max. So how does this work? We've got the 3D Mark scores on the horizontal axis, and then one by one we've got the cards popping up. So the first card, you just have to look down here, is the TNT. Then we've got the TNT2 M64, so actually a little bit faster. Then we've got the TNT2 Pro, and then the GeForce 256 DDR, so that one makes quite a jump forward. The GeForce 2 MX 400 doesn't really gain much. The Quadro 2 Pro is a little bit faster. And then we get to the GeForce 3 and the 4 cards, and they're actually slower. And why would that be? That is really because of the driver versions. If you remember looking at the first slide, we had to use a lot newer drivers with these cards, and they simply don't optimize for the old programs anymore. And that can happen in games as well, that you'll find that the newer cards, and you have to use new drivers with most newer cards, that they simply don't perform as well as the older stuff. So that's something to look out for. Okay, 3D Mark 2000. For some reason, the M64 is a little bit slower in this benchmark, but not much. The TNT2 Pro is a little bit faster, and the GeForce 256 makes a massive leap, and that's because the 3D Mark 2000 benchmark uses the texture and lighting engine. It's heavily optimized towards that, and we can see all the newer cards that have texture and lighting are also faster. And then we get the same problem as with the 3D Mark 99 Max, that GeForce 3 and newer, because of the newer driver, lose in performance. Okay, our first game, GL Quake in 16 bits. So the graphics cards start from the left, so we've got the TNT here. And what you got to look at here is we've got the resolutions on the horizontal axis. So at 640 by 480, you're getting around 50 frames per second for the TNT. As we ramp up resolutions, we lose performance. At 800 by 600, we're getting 40 frames, and then at 1280 by 1024, that's maybe 25, 27 frames or something like that. If you see the line going downwards, that means the graphics card is struggling to keep up the performance as you raise resolution. So you want to see, ideally, you want to see a horizontal line, or maybe a slight slope. Let's go to the next graphics card. Here we've got the TNT2 M64. So that card, quite interesting. It starts off very high at low resolution, but as you crank up the resolution, it loses performance faster than the regular TNT. Moving on to the TNT2 Pro, that one is a lot more powerful. At these two resolutions, over 100 FPS, and even at, that's probably my recommended or preferred resolution, 1024 by 768, it almost does at 80 frames per second. So that's really good performance, and that resolution is quite challenging for a lot of these cards. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. This is now the GeForce 256 DDR, and we can see that this is a lot more powerful at the high resolutions. We are now getting over 80 frames per second, even at 1280 by 1024. So that's already pretty good. All these resolutions, the graphics card is very capable. Okay, moving on to the GeForce 2 MX 400. A little bit behind the GeForce 256, but not much. And this card, the GeForce 2 MX 400, is a lot easier to find than the 256 DDR. The 256 DDR, being the first GeForce, is a bit of a novelty card, and a lot of people are chasing it. Alrighty, next to the Quadro 2 Pro, we can this looks real nice. straight, almost perfect horizontal line up to 1024 by 768, 130 frames, and then a small dip going to the top resolution. And we've got the GeForce 3, that one actually loses performance. Again, that's probably an issue to do with the newer driver. We've got the GeForce 4 MX 460, so that card is faster again as the GeForce 3, and only loses a little bit at the very high resolution. So that card is very similar to the Quadro 2 Pro. And finally, we've got the GeForce 4 Ti 4200. I'm not sure why this card is a little bit slower than the MX. I'm not quite sure what happened there, but that's the results I got. Okay, let's go to 32 bits. Here we've got the TNT. Had an issue at the very high resolution. I think it just ran out of memory. The TNT to M64, a little bit faster, especially at the lower resolution, but at the high resolutions, not really. The TNT 2 Pro does a lot better. Now remember, this is 32-bit colors. It's a lot more demanding, so you need definitely a more powerful video card. But with the TNT 2, you can definitely play at 1024 by 768 in 32-bit colors. Next card, the 256 DDR, quite a bit faster. You can see the difference in memory performance at these higher resolutions. We're talking 110 frames per second at that resolution. That's very impressive. The GeForce 2 MX 400, a bit slower. And here we've got the Quadro 2 Pro. At the low resolution, there's really not much difference, but at the high resolution, the card can separate itself a little bit. Again, the GeForce 3 is a little bit slower than the GeForce 2 cards. And then we get a bit of a bump with the GeForce 4 MX 460, and here's the TI 4200. So once again, we can see that the TI is a little bit behind the GeForce 4 MX 460. Not quite sure what it is, but it's the same under 32-bit and 16-bit colors. Quake 2, 16 bits. Straight away we can see that all the FPS are a little bit lower. We've got the TNT 2 M64, then we've got the TNT 2. So if you see this horizontal line, you can kind of tell that there is a system bottleneck, that the card maybe could go faster if the processor wouldn't hold it back. But look at that, the GeForce 256 DDR makes quite a big of a jump. So for Quake 2, that's quite a big difference, and it's perfectly horizontal, so it doesn't matter what resolution. Now 1280 by 1024 is not there because that resolution doesn't exist, and if you play 1280 by 960, it switches to window mode, so I didn't include that resolution. Then we've got the MX 400 and the Quadro 2 Pro. They're all neck and neck on the same level. We've got the GeForce 3, the GeForce 4, and the TI 4200 loses a bit of performance again. But that just tells you in Quake 2 there's less separation between the cards, really. You basically, with the TNT, you might lose a bit of performance, but all the GeForces offer very similar performance, with the GeForce 3 and higher doing better. Okay, Quake 2 32-bit. Here's the TNT M64 and the TNT 2. Next up, we've got the GeForce 256 DDR. Nice horizontal line, just around 75 FPS in all resolutions, so that's very nice. The GeForce 2 MX, the Quadro 2, GeForce 3, then the GeForce 4 MX 460, and once again the TI 4200, a little bit slower. Okay, incoming. One of my favorite games, really, because it was one of the early 3D games, and very colorful, and I remember seeing it in magazines and on demo videos, and it always impressed me. The game is quite average, but you should try it out. It's actually not that bad. So the TNT, here's the TNT, and we've got the TNT M64, and up here we've got the TNT M64 and the TNT 2. So the TNT 2 really maxes out the system. It doesn't matter what resolution you play at, very high frames per second. And then all the other cards I gave 0 points, and that's because starting with the GeForce cards, Nvidia changed something. It has to do with color keying, and the heads-up display isn't displayed correctly anymore. So that's just an example of where games can break if you're using hardware that's too new. So my general advice is the further you move away from 1999 in terms of hardware and drivers, potentially the more you're going to run into an issue. I've only tested a small selection of games, but even then I could see that. I could see those issues. So basically, TNT2 is your best bet to play incoming with all the settings. And the trend continues with 32-bit, although we can see here it loses a little bit in performance. However, this is not a game that needs 60 FPS. It's got an FPS lock that you can toggle, and I believe it caps it at 30 FPS for really nice, consistent gameplay. Okay, let's continue with what have we got here. Oh yes, we're looking at AA, anti-aliasing performance. So we're starting with the GeForce 256, and I use the same driver across all the cards, version 45.23. So with no AA, we're getting 111 frames, and we turn on 2xAA, we basically lose half the performance, and then even less if we go to 4xAA. So let's have a look at the next card. That's the Quadro 2 Pro. So it starts off a little bit higher, and it also loses a little bit less, but still a substantial performance drop. And when we move to the GeForce 3, we can see that the performance drop of using AA is a lot less. So Nvidia improved the technology, the technique of doing AA, and with the GeForce 3 and now also the GeForce 4, you can see that turning on these eye candy features, you lose a lot less performance. And the GeForce 4 is really the king of this, even with 4x AA. It is a very fast graphics card. Okay, let's have a look at texture and lighting. So we discussed this earlier, that with the GeForce, the graphics card has a texture and lighting engine which can carry out calculations on the GPU that traditionally were calculated on the processor, and therefore free up the processor with more time to do other stuff. So here we have our GeForce 256. If we do the texture and lighting in software, we're getting 41.4 frames, and if we enable the texture and lighting on the graphics card, we're getting almost 48 frames. So that's a nice little boost. Let's have a look what the other cards do. It's basically the same picture, just that some of the newer cards, like the GeForce 3 and the GeForce 4, they start off a little bit higher, but they're not gaining that much anymore. So the bottom line is, yes, texture and lighting can have an impact in games, but firstly, it's not by much, and secondly, all the games, well, I don't want to say all the games because there's probably an exception, but the games I looked at that support texture and lighting on the on the GPU are all quite modern and don't really run well on the SuperSocket 7 platform in the first place. Remember, this is the 550 megahertz processor. I've tuned the BIOS, all the performance options are turned on, so this is as good as it gets. And 50 FPS, it's not ideal. I wouldn't play MDK2 on a SuperSocket 7 machine. It's probably suited for older games a lot better, and I might talk about that later. Okay, moving on to DOS. Now there's very little to talk about. They're all performing similar, apart from the two GeForce 4 cards. So they're a little bit slower, but all the other ones, I mean, 400 frames, that's plenty. Even 300 frames is enough. PC Player Bench, we can see similar things, but there's no slowdown, so they're all performing around the same level. In high resolution, same story. They're performing around the 43 FPS. All cards, same results. And then we've got Doom, and here we can see also that the GeForce 4 cards are a little bit behind, but look, Doom is capped at 35 FPS anyway, so yeah, doesn't really make a difference. And in Quake, there is no no difference. So in Quake, very little difference with the graphics cards. Okay, so if you made it to this point, well, good on you. It's a lot of analysis to take in. Okay, so time to wrap it up, provide a summary, a conclusion. What do I think? What should you get? Well, it's really hard to recommend a single card. It really depends on what type of game you play. And I must admit, maybe the games and benchmarks I used are not really representative of the kind of games you're going to play on a Super Socket 7 machine. But I had real issues finding older games with built-in benchmark capability. I noticed some old versions of Fraps, but I just prefer something built-in that's easy to benchmark and to get the numbers. But the more I was playing around with these graphics cards, I realized that you probably gonna play older games like Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, for example, or Dark Forces 2, or one of the early Need for Speed games, you know. Games that have processor issues that run too fast on a modern machine. And this is where the Super Socket 7 platform shines. If you've got the K6 3 Plus, you just open a little software tool, lower the multiplier, and boom, you've got a 200 megahertz processor, and you can play all the older games. Still, we got enough information out of the benchmarks that I used. So to start off with, I want to pick out a few cards that you can easily get because they're cheap and really easy to find. The first one is definitely the TNT M64. Now this card is not gonna win any performance records, but because it's based on the TNT chip, it is very compatible. So incoming and a lot of the older games are very well supported with the TNT range, and this card is cheap as chips. If you go to eBay and you type in Nvidia TNT 2, you should find a ton of these M64 or Avanta graphics cards. They're so cheap that you should just get one to test and play around with. Another card I recommend for bargain hunters is the GeForce 4 MX. Again, if you type in GeForce 4, you'll find so many MX versions, and there are a lot of them. There's the 460, the 440, the 420, but there are also SE versions. Now the MX 460 is the most powerful one, but don't be put off. The 440 should still be okay, and even if you pick up an SE, it might actually work well with your games. And the benefit of this card is probably not compatibility with the older games. You will likely run into a few issues, but the vast majority will work fine. The strength of the GeForce 4 is that you can use the eye candy features, texture filtering and anti-aliasing, without losing too much performance. And another card I recommend if you on a budget is the GeForce 2 MX range. So there are three cards: the regular GeForce 2 MX, the MX 400, and then the MX 200. But I must say the MX 200 is cut down. It's got quite a slower memory performance. So all these three cards should not cost you much. Okay, the next set of cards is going to cost you a little bit more, but you're also going to get more performance. The only card I'm probably a little bit hesitant on recommending is the well, not the only card. One of the cards out of these cards that I'm a bit hesitant to recommend is the regular TNT. It's got less memory, and performance is quite basic. And anything the TNT can do, the TNT 2 just does a little bit better. So I'm just gonna put that aside. And as you've seen in the benchmarks, the M64 is not far behind the TNT. They are very even Steven in most benchmarks. Okay, the TNT 2. In terms of compatibility, performance, and just as an all-round graphics card, is probably my pick. There are a couple of versions. There's the regular TNT 2, there's the Pro, and there's also the Ultra. Finding these can be a little bit tricky because whenever you search for TNT2, you'll find the cheap TNT2 M64 version. So you might, you might have to look for specific model numbers and hunt them down. So be prepared that you might have to spend a little bit extra, but it's definitely a card worth getting. The GeForce 256 DDR, I think this card will cost you quite a bit. There are two versions. There's one with the DDR, the faster memory, and there's another version with the SD-RAM. Well, the DDR version is a little bit faster, that's it. Otherwise, there's no difference. Being the first GeForce and the first card with the texture lighting stuff, it's a bit of a collector's item. So I find it hard to recommend this card, especially considering that even with this card, you'll have compatibility issues with some games. For example, Incoming also has the broken heads-up display on the GeForce 256. Quadro Pro, if you can find one cheap, why not? They're built very well and are very fast in performance, but this might already be a little bit too new for my liking. So yeah, it really depends. If your game doesn't have any compatibility issues and it works fine, absolutely use these faster cards. I'm just always a bit hesitant recommending something that is too new, just because I know that some games can cause issues. Between these cards, look, yes, the Quadro 2 Pro is faster, but the MX is not far behind, and you got to remember that the processor on the Socket 7 is really putting a lid on the performance ceiling, so it might actually not be worth spending a lot to get a proper GeForce 2. If you get a cheap MX 400, that's just as good. Okay, then we've got the GeForce 3. I've got the TI 200. And this, in my eyes, is already a Windows XP card. It came out, I think, in the same year that Windows XP came out. DirectX 8 compatible. I just find it hard to recommend over the other cards. There's no real reason to get it. Yes, the anti-aliasing, that's all nice and good, but you might as well go with the GeForce 4 because that has even better performance with anti-aliasing and texture filtering and so on. So with the GeForce 4, not sure if it's worth going for the TI 4200. In my test it was a little bit slower. I'm still not sure why. Maybe I did use a newer driver for the 4200. I'm not 100% sure anymore. I think you'd be happy with one of these, MX460 or MX440, and that gets the job done. Now, if I had to pick one single card out of the bunch for Windows 98 gaming, my recommendation would definitely be the TNT2. Performance, compatibility, it's the whole package. It does beautiful 32-bit colors. It's fast enough to enjoy even newer games such as Quake and Quake 2, and all the older games that came out before should run really well on this card. And you can also, one thing I do is when I investigate older games, I always read the README files, and you can read about what chipsets are supported. And you'll find a lot of references about the TNT and TNT2. And if you go a little bit back in time, you'll read about the, I think, what's it called, the River 128. But this is really the main Windows 98, Windows 95 gaming graphics card from Nvidia in my eyes. Excellent compatibility, and if I had to pick one card, this would be it. And that's it, guys. Time to wrap up this video. We had a look at a bunch of Nvidia cards for the Super Socket 7 platform, and although I had a lot of issues, It doesn't mean that you're going to have issues. There are lots of motherboards out there and lots of combinations between graphics cards and BIOS settings and chipset drivers you can try out. I'm very optimistic that you're going to find a setting that will work for you. I really like the Nvidia cards, especially the image quality with the 32-bit colors is very nice. And if the games are compatible, you can use some of the faster cards and turn on eye candy, anti-aliasing, texture filters, and all of that. And my personal best, definitely the TNT2. Highly recommend that you add that to your shopping list. It should run all the games pretty well. Some of the later ones, just go with a faster GeForce, but in my opinion, if it doesn't run that well on a SuperSocket 7 platform, you might as well build a dedicated Windows 98 gaming machine based on a slot 1 Pentium 3 or something like that. So remember what the cool thing of the SuperSocket 7 platform is. It's all about the flexibility, bridging the period between DOS and early Windows games. So that is the strength. You can play a bit of DOS, you can play a bit of Windows 3D games. It's not meant to replace a dedicated DOS PC, and it's not meant to replace a dedicated Windows 98 PC. There are better options, but if you're looking for one machine that covers both areas, SuperSocket 7 is the platform to get. So in the next video, we're gonna check out the video cards from 3DFX. It's all about the Voodoo. So thanks for watching and see you later.